Welcome to the T2 Hubcast. Join Martin, Dave, Spencer and guests as they discuss all things personal and professional development. The T2 Hubcast, brought to you by the People Performance People.
Welcome to the T2 Hubcast with me, Spencer Locker.
And me, Victoria Garrett.
You don't know how close I came to saying me, Martin Johnson, then. How you doing, Victoria?
I'm good. How are you, Spence?
Yeah, we're doing all right. Those 2 days we've just been doing was pretty cool, actually. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But now we're back in the office, now back in the podcast room, and we're going to put something together for the good ladies and gentlemen from T2 Towers. So one of the things that's been playing on my mind, Victoria, is we've been engaging with a few clients recently, quite a few clients actually. But one thing that seems to be quite a sort of a common trait or a common opinion out there is this sort of misunderstanding or confusion about coaching and mentoring. Because just to put things into a context, working with lots of different clients across lots of different sort of business spectrums, so private sector, public sector, manufacturing, business, sales, all sorts. So it covers all sort of areas. But we just seem to be getting a lot of coaching and mentoring questions and well, yeah. So there's a bit of confusion out there, or maybe it's not confusion. Maybe it just needs a little bit of clarification.
Yeah.
So if I may put that on your toes, V.
Yes.
What is the difference? Are they the same, or are they totally different? Or in your experience, tell me about coaching and mentoring.
Well, you're right, Spence. Coaching is a buzzword that's been around for quite a lot of years now. I'd say since probably the early 90s. But it is, in my experience, a term that is often misunderstood, certainly when you tie it into mentoring. And that's partly because the evidence that's out there, if you Google it, is kind of confused as well. So just taking it right back and thinking a little bit about the history of coaching to start with. Coaching, when we think of sport, it's quite clear cut, isn't it? If you want to learn a new skill in sport, you would get a coach and they would teach you how to do it. And I think that's where some of the confusion lies, because in business, it's slightly different. Now, in the history, there was a gentleman called Tim Galway who was working with lots of sports clubs, and he wrote a book called The Inner Game. And he wrote it first for tennis and then for skiing and for golf as well. I think he actually went on to write it for quite a few sports, but he was basically looking at the internal obstacles and in order to improve performance, really, and what that looked like. And then along came a gentleman called John Whitmore, who is a guru, really, in the coaching world. A guru in coaching. For anyone that knows anything about coaching, they've probably tried the GROW model, and that was by John Whitmore. But he wrote the first text that came out in terms of business coaching, and that was in the early 90s, and he was a guru. At the time, he was a racing driver. And he was kind of thinking, well, do you know what? If this works in sport, why does this not work in business as well? And he wrote the book Coaching for Performance back in the very early 90s. And that really has been where coaching has grown from. So that's that element. Mentoring has kind of always been around, probably without a badge or a label. It's just something we did to support staff, which is maybe where a bit of the confusion comes from. But if we think about them in terms of approach and tools, they are very different approaches. And when I teach it, I try to teach them as two individual tools that then, once we understand what they are independently, we can then bring them back together because they can be used interchangeably. So coaching is very much creating space for somebody to reflect and to unlock potential in order for them to grow, ultimately to empower them, improve self-esteem. The net gain is performance. Okay. Mentoring is when we have seen or somebody's come to us with a skill gap and said, I've got this new bit of software. I don't know how to use it properly. I'm not getting the best out of it. Or I'm new to this post and I don't really know where best to sort of spend my time or where to focus my attention. They're crying out for a mentor, someone to take them under the wing and say, let me show you, let me facilitate some guidance. Maybe you need a bit of training, but let's put a program of support together. Whereas coaching is the polar opposite. The coach doesn't speak. They do very little talking. They just ask big, powerful questions in order for the coachee to reflect and to come up with their own decisions. Does that make sense? So they are very
It does.
different in approach.
Yeah, and you can sort of predict where the confusion could come from, because if somebody, let's say for the sake of argument, somebody in L&D, with internal L&D or HR or whatever, if they were approached and sort of said, sort out some coaching and mentoring, and their only experience of coaching and mentoring was their sports experience, then if they approach coaching and mentoring from that sports direction, it's sort of the other way around to how business does it.
Yes.
That's my understanding of it from what
Yes.
yeah. So we could see if they come into contact with somebody who is a business coach or a business mentor, and they try and sort of, there's the disconnect there, isn't there? There's a little potential for a bit of a disconnect.
Yes.
You know what? Thank you for that. It's nice to actually sort of get a little bit of clarity where that's concerned. So, okay, so what about the application? I mean, whereabouts would you use coaching, and whereabouts would you use mentoring? Which approach is best?
Well, sometimes people will come to us with a need,
Right.
and we can unpick it from there. Sometimes we can see a need or a gap, and we can ask for it. It's much better, certainly for coaching, if somebody comes to you than you go to them, because sometimes, again, in my experience, it can be seen as punishment when you say you need coaching. It's like, what have I done wrong? And it's not that at all. But if we look at it in its most simple terms, I would say coaching works very well when we've identified some sort of personal issue that's blocking performance. So this could be a lack of confidence. So they've got a big presentation to do and they don't feel they're up to the task. Or it could be that they're in a new role and they feel like the role's too big for them and they've got a bit of imposter syndrome going on. Or it could be you've got 2 or 3 members of the team, somebody new comes in and the dynamics changed and there's a bit of a personality clash there. They might be struggling with time management, feel overwhelmed. Anything that's kind of got an emotion attached to it or something personal attached to it is usually a coaching approach, as opposed to a mentoring approach, which is usually more aligned to professional development, in my experience, which is when somebody needs additional skills. So it could be a new member of staff in the department that needs to be trained up in something. It could be somebody struggling with a new project. They've been given a project to do and they've never done project management and they don't really know where to start. Much more skill gap led. Does that make sense? So having an initial conversation with somebody will help you dictate which route you head down to start with. Not to say down that route, there won't be some interchanging, actually something, we might need a bit of mentoring here on that, or mentoring to coaching, but you would start with an initial plan,
right,
one way or the other.
Right. So I think we've seen it in a number of organisations where, let's say, for the sake of argument, a project has been suggested, or a need has been recognised for a certain a sort of journey in a certain direction, and maybe a junior or an inexperienced staff member is sort of tasked with this. But alongside of that, they say, and along the way, you'll be mentored by such and such. So that might be a more experienced member of staff. And you know what? This might even be that sort of progression planning. Sort of saying, right, okay, then, so this senior member of staff who's very experienced, but maybe going to a different employer or a different branch, or maybe even retiring or something like that. So what you're doing is you're bringing somebody in early doors and you're getting them to mentor them, sort of passing on the benefit of their experience, maybe, in the sense that, well, you know what, eventually I'm going to bang out of this and you'll be flying solo. And
and it's a really good point, Spence, because actually when it comes to coaching, the coach does not need to be the more experienced individual. In fact, a good coach can coach anybody in any organization at any level. You are a professional soundboard because you're obviously just there to encourage reflection and unlock potential. You're absolutely right. From the mentoring perspective, the mentor, whoever that is, has to be the more experienced member of staff. Now, that doesn't mean they've been in the business longer. Sometimes there's something called reverse mentoring, for example, where somebody from the top of the organization, so to speak, could be mentored by somebody on the ground who's kind of got more skills in, let's say, social media, because they've got the finger on the pulse, and actually they could teach the senior executives a thing or two. But somebody in that relationship has to be more experienced than the other to pass on that skill gap. So you're right, the skills of the two types of the two types of approaches, coach and mentors, are very, very different.
Right. Yeah, good stuff. When you said about, we were just talking about what works best, coaching or mentoring, there was a few things that you mentioned about certain situations are going to require this approach, certain situations are going to require that approach, some will require coaching, some will require mentoring. So in a nutshell, for let's say we're talking to somebody who needs to know what the difference is between coaching and mentoring.
Yep.
I mean, I know we've talked briefly about we've talked about definitions, but when we start talking about these different approaches, what do they look like?
Yeah, and they are literally polar opposites. So, for example, with coaching, you're creating space to think. With mentoring, you're actually advising and suggesting. Two completely opposites there. Equally, coaching is very sort of non-judgmental. With mentoring, you may need to make judgments because you're going to be actually observing somebody, perhaps doing something, and then giving them feedback, or can I give you some advice on this? The coach needs not be the expert. The mentor needs to be the expert. With coaching, we're looking at different questioning techniques. So we're looking at open questions or non-directive questioning, as opposed to mentoring, where we would actually want to clarify certain elements and get to grips with what that person knows and understands. So we're going to be much more directive in our questioning, asking more closed questions. So we see very much coaching as being more of a hands-off approach in general, mentoring much more of a hands-on approach. So you can see just from those few examples, they really do sit at opposite sides of the spectrum. However, you can overlap the two. And the way you do that is quite simple. It's by asking for consent, which might sound a bit strange. But if I'm coaching somebody and I'm in that asking open, non-directive questioning, but there's something that I think I could share with them that I think they'd really benefit from knowing because I have similar experience in that field, I wouldn't just share that without saying, I've got some ideas that I'd like to share because I've got some experience in this field. Would you like me to share them with you? If my coachee says no, I keep my mouth shut. If the coach, which never happens, if the coachee says, yes, please do, we then move across into a mentoring role where we're now advising and suggesting. And that is how we move between the two types of techniques. So I'd be asking different questions, now advising and suggesting.
Right. Because that actually, about halfway through your answer there, I was thinking, well, right at the beginning, I was thinking to myself, so they're opposite ends, so they're sort of binary. It's a binary choice and they're mutually exclusive. But no, that's not the case. You just alluded to that, where we're sort of saying we've got that opportunity where, what did you call it? Consent.
Yes, if we ask consent's probably the best word I can think of, but we basically have to ask permission.
Yeah.
In order to move across into that role, because actually with coaching, it's not our place to advise and suggest. It's for them to have that space to reflect. So it's not my place to talk and tell. If they want me to because they're stuck and I think I could help, then with permission, I can do that.
Yeah.
And that's where I become the mentor. And this is where coaching and mentoring work really beautifully together with a combination of the two.
Right. Oh, right. Okay. So some people know this, some people don't, but sort of questioning people is a bit of a hobby of mine. And you mentioned about when we were talking about the differences between the coaching and the mentoring, you talked about directive and non-directive questioning. Can you talk a bit about that, please?
Yeah, which is a bit of again, they're quite sort of difficult terms to get your head around, aren't they? But ultimately, we're talking about open versus closed questioning techniques, or open versus closed stroke clarifying questions.
Yeah.
And this is, in my experience, one of the biggest issues that people have when they are coaching or mentoring, is they get a real block as to, I don't know enough questions. I don't know where to take the question in, and they get really hung up about it. And when I first started training to be a coach back in 2010, I used to have like 2 or 3 sheets of A4 with like just hundreds of questions on them, that somebody would say something and then I'd have to sort of scan the questions to think, what's the next best question to ask to go off in a certain direction? And obviously that just stilts a nice organic conversation, really. So it really is the one thing as a coach or mentor that you have to really get to grips with and become good at asking the right questions to elicit the information that you want to guide somebody from point A to point B.
Right.
But there are some fantastic models out there, certainly within the coaching arena, like the GROW model that I mentioned with John Whitmore, but there are others, the Oscar model, the Fuel model, to name but a few there, that can be used to help guide you through that questioning technique that keeps it really simple. And you can actually coach somebody in as little as 4 questions. And you could repeat those questions with almost every member of staff in whatever given circumstance. So you
Right.
can coach very quickly and easily.
Hmm.
And the more you realise it's just actually a dialogue, it's just the way you ask the question, then you don't worry so much about the question, you just worry about the way you're asking it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
In order to
it
get
does.
what you need out of it. So
Yeah,
it's
makes a lot
something
of
that
sense.
people do worry about, but they shouldn't.
No, and just sort of sticking with that sort of agenda for the moment. A lot of organisations we work with, particularly recently, when we start talking to them as individuals, as teams, as complete organisations, one of the things that is very important to people is effective communication.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as they say effective communication, sometimes they don't really realise that effective communication is both transmit and receive.
Yeah.
It's listening as much as it is asking. So when we start talking about the different styles of questioning, the directive and the non-directive questioning, and people getting fixated and worried about which question's which,
Mm-hmm.
how do I know what question means this, and it's not so much worrying about that, but making sure that you focus on what the answers are, because the answers can inform the direction you go, the length of the engagement, the amount of understanding, that so on and so forth.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And especially for coaching, listening is one of the key skills that you will need as a good coach, because they are doing the majority of the talking. And you're right what you say, we coach the whole person. We don't coach them just personally or professionally. What they bring to work is their whole self, and we have to do that. The challenge here in this COVID world is that we're often not face to face with somebody. So we have the luxury of being face to face. You can see the body language, you can see the leg, sort of moving up and down as you're talking. And as a coach, you're thinking, why? There's some anxiety there sitting behind that question that I need to unpick. We don't have that when we're sitting staring at a screen and we're only seeing sort of head and shoulders, which makes it so much more challenging.
And sometimes you don't even see that.
No.
If they've got the camera off.
They could be on the telephone. We could coach, but it's fine. It just means we have to sort of explore things a little bit deeper and go to the extra mile. But you're absolutely right. It's not just about the questions. It's about observing the person and the body language and the effective comms. You're right. Yeah.
Right. So what about the benefits of coaching? I mean, we've talked about what the sort of the definition of coaching. We talked about which sort of approach might work best, what sort of approach, what application, if you like. So we've talked about the differences between coaching and mentoring, and the fact that they can be opposites, but actually they aren't mutually exclusive and they can be intertwined. And we talked about the sort of the questioning styles that we can use, or the two basic questioning styles we can apply. But we don't really think about what coaching and mentoring can give an organization. What are the benefits? What can an organization expect results wise from an effective coaching and mentoring program?
Well, there's a lot of research out there that shows the benefits to organizations, not just to the individuals involved, but to the people that actually coach and mentor as well. The stats are really quite huge. And what often the research shows as well is that those that have had coaching and mentoring often go on to want to give back and continue the cycle. So I've heard a lot of organizations saying they want to move towards a coaching and mentoring culture, and they want to embed it in everyday sort of application of everything that they do. And actually, when we start to do that, what we're doing is really empowering our staff, because a good coaching or mentoring program, both parties will get as much out of it as each other. So it's not just about giving your skills. A good coach will learn as much in return. So what you're doing by investing in a coaching mentoring strategy is you're really starting to empower your staff. You're really starting to increase engagement by making people feel heard, feel valued, feel respected. Everybody's learning from everybody else. So it helps motivate teams. It obviously is unblocking potential. So once we've unblocked potential, well, the possibilities are endless, aren't they? But the research shows that organizations that can do it and do it well have massively improved retention and ultimately improved performance. So what's not to like?
Got you. And I do agree with what you're saying there. I do agree with what you're saying. So I think we've got to go right back to the beginning again at this stage now. Why aren't more organisations employing this? Is it because of a lack of clarity, a lack of understanding of the roles of coaching and mentoring? Because we talked about misunderstanding right at the beginning, didn't we? So do you think that they may have tried? Obviously, there's every situation is different, every organisation is different. But do you think that they may have tried it, got it confused, it didn't really work, so we kicked that into the bin? Yeah.
I think one of the things I hear more often than not is that people just say, we haven't got the time to do this. And actually, that is so incorrect because, as I say, a coaching conversation could be as simple as 4 questions. So I would question that and say, so do you never have one-to-ones? Do you not have CPD? Do you ever have conversations with your line managers, with your staff, ad hoc? Do you ever go over to their desk and say, what are you doing? Well, yeah, well, then you can coach. You don't need time to create a coaching program. It's just a dialogue. It's just the way you turn those questions around that's either you telling somebody to do something or you empowering them to give them choices to make their own decisions, empower them and improve their self-esteem and make them feel as though they are in control of what it is that they're doing and have choices with that.
Right.
So it doesn't take time. It's not an onerous thing. It's quite straightforward. But I think the time it takes for an organisation to really embed it, top to bottom, left to right, up to down, is such that perhaps they want to do it, but they're not quite sure what it is, how to do it, and what it's going to cost, or how to sort of turn those wheels around in that direction. So perhaps it's just in the too difficult to deal with pile, or they've had a go, as you say, and they've stalled. And I've worked with organisations that have spent many, many, many months, weeks, hours around the table just trying to distinguish what does coaching and mentoring even mean.
Yeah.
So they've not even got past first base before they've moved on from it. But I suppose if nothing else is shared from this session other than don't be scared of it, give it a go, just embrace it and start to learn, or come on one of our courses where you can learn some of those simple techniques to just start that snowball rolling, you'll soon see the benefits. There's lots of light bulb moments to be had, and real opportunities for growth. So,
right, and it certainly sounds to me that it's a skill set, both coaching and mentoring. It's a skill set that's almost essential for a good manager, good team leader, good supervisor, somebody who is I don't like to say the word controlling, overseeing, possibly a role model, somebody who has got some people working for them, to actually empower them and to give them, add to their skill sets. Then maybe you've got to sort of encourage. Maybe it might be one of these CPD things where you're sort of looking at somebody and saying, right, you're now a sort of reasonably experienced manager or leader or whatever you want to call it. We need to get you, we'll put you on a coaching and mentoring course or something like that. Just so, and again, it might not necessarily be you are a formal coach or a formal mentor, but allowing your interactions with your team to have a coaching bent or a mentoring bent, whichever you see is applicable. Again, it's an essential tool. We talk about the toolkit, don't we? Engineers have a toolbox. And this toolbox holds many tools, but you're not going to use every tool on every job. But the moment you get to a job where you need a certain tool and it isn't in your box, you can't do that job effectively. So, equipping managers, leaders, supervisors, whatever you like calling them, with the skill set of coaching and mentoring is a pretty sort of easy question to answer, I think.
Probably one of the most underutilized leadership approaches out there, really. But those that do and invest in it and get it right see the results almost instantaneously. I did a session once in an organization, and I tasked the leaders to go off and have a go with a member of staff on a coaching sort of model. And they came back for the next session, and there was one particular female, and she said, I really struggle with not talking at my staff and telling them what I want them to do. It just feels like, whether it's coming from a control, I don't know, but it just feels like I would rather be that person that says, right, what I'd like you to do is this, this, and this, and sort of tell them what my needs are. And by tasking her with this coaching approach and asking the same questions, but almost just a different way around, she said, I got to this stage where I asked a question and the member of staff I was talking to didn't have the answer. And there was this really awkward silence. And I told them to allow that silence to happen if it happens. So she did. And she said, we sat there and it felt like hours. It was only seconds, but it just felt like this gap was. She said, and I literally wanted to put my fist in my teeth, just bite. I was just like, so wanted to jump in and help, but I didn't. And eventually the member of staff said, well, I could do X, Y, Z. And she said, she gave me something that I could then jump on and say, fantastic, so what are you going to do from here then? And actually move forward. And she said, I actually saw the body language by the end of that little coaching or that conversation I saw the body language of that member of staff change. The shoulders went back, they stood a little bit taller, and they actually walked out there. I could actually see how empowered they were, that they'd come up with their own solution. And she said it was a massive light bulb that I thought, this is where I can free up so much time as a leader for myself by giving people back the tools that they need to empower themselves to make their own decisions. And it was just almost like freeing for her to think, why have I've got it wrong so much? But when I always say, when you are coaching somebody and they go quiet, that's when the magic happens. Because when we talk about unlocking potential, when people don't have an instant answer to something, it's because they're going to have to dig a little bit deeper, to think a bit deeper. And that's what we're trying to encourage. So it can be difficult to start with. It can feel awkward, but not to be scared of it, and to just allow that magic to happen in those moments. And allow people to make their own choices. They'll feel more accountable, and ultimately it will drive results and self-esteem. So
excellent. Just as we're coming up to 25 minutes now, just something that you mentioned earlier on, and I gave myself a little bit of a wry smile. You mentioned about reverse mentoring.
Yes.
Where somebody from a more senior position can actually learn from a more junior member of staff, maybe. So have you any experience of this? Any sort of examples that you could pull out? And
I have, but only in one organisation I've ever worked with that used. There are different types of mentoring approaches. Reverse mentoring is one. There's also executive mentoring as well between executives. There's one-on-one mentoring, group mentoring, training mentoring. There's all different types of mentoring strategies. But reverse mentoring, I think, is one that actually really empowers people, and it allows people that wouldn't normally have access to, say, senior leaders, that opportunity, not just to have access and talk to them, but to build networks with them and actually teach them something as well. There's a program at the moment, Spence, I don't know if anybody that's listening has seen it as well, called Undercover Boss. And it very much focuses on that reverse mentoring type approach, where the boss kind of goes back, they sort of make themselves look different, shave the hair off and pretend they've got tattoos and things, and they go back on ground floor level and just talk to people and actually learn. All right, they're looking at it from what's going wrong perspective, but it's very much based on reverse mentoring, that actually sometimes people at the top can very much, I don't like to talk hierarchically, but people at the top can very much learn from juniors a thing or two. And I think it's such an opportunity that's missed. And it just shows, you know what, there is no hierarchy, because I can learn from you, you can learn from me, and we all learn from each other. And what better to do for a team than to all empower each other and share knowledge, and never see yourself as somebody that's above anybody else, but instead we're all on the same level in that way, that we've all got different skills. We all bring different, qualities, experience, that as a hotbed we could just all throw in the pot and learn from one another, and all grow as together. And I think any organisation that embeds anything like that in their strategy moving forward is onto a winner.
Yeah. And do you think that there's any potential there for being disrailed by things like ego?
Absolutely. I think that's what stops people doing it. Or maybe they just don't even know these things exist. And just coming on a course and realising what scope you've got to play with coaching and mentoring, that if you came on one of our courses, we could show you. Might be all it takes to kind of go, I didn't even really know that was a thing, but actually now I do. That could be something really useful. So come along, have a listen, see what you can take from one of our sessions. If it's if this podcast has been helpful, maybe it's a good time to have a think about it.
So thanks Victoria. So with two minutes to go, very aware of time. I wonder if I could ask you to give me a quick summary about everything we've talked about today.
Wow, whistle stop tour.
Whistle stop tour.
So coaching ultimately is a dialogue. It's a conversation where we're encouraging other people to release potential, unlock potential in themselves. We do very little talking as the coach, but we act as the professional soundboard. Mentoring is a strategy where there's different strands of mentoring, different styles of mentoring as terms of a program we could embed to help somebody to gain professional skills and improve sort of expertise in certain areas. So somebody's got to be more experienced than the other person, whether that's top to bottom, left to right, up to down, it doesn't matter. Different approaches we can do that, but we're all learning skills from one another and following the growth of that person in learning those skills through smart objectives and things like that. We're actually setting action plans and strategies. So two very different approaches, but fantastic outcomes in terms of research for businesses if you did invest in a culture of coaching and mentoring, for individuals, and ultimately retention, performance, some of the bigger messages. So say what's not to love.
Whew. Thanks, V. Absolutely brilliant. Really enjoyed that.
Thanks.
Excellent. And I'm sure people listening will feel sort of get their eyes open on that one. So until next time, Victoria Garrett, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
This is me, Spencer Locker, signing off for the T2 Hub. See you next time.